Awesome.
And so you put my water in the floor, man.
Well, because it was in the shot. It was blurring.
Oh,
up
you're
the
like
shot.
so worried about it now. You'll like
Well,
stuff a Mountain Dew bottle.
The computer's still in the shot. I don't mind that. It's fine.
Yeah.
Just the water bottle was.
A little too much for you.
It was too much.
Dave, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man.
Very good. So we've been talking about having you on for, gosh,
We just had him on.
well, I know, but like then everything changed, and ever since everything
What changed?
changed,
I don't know anything
like,
about anything.
it just blew up. It just
I
took
try to
off.
stay out of the industry
Wait,
as much as
let the man introduce himself first.
I just want to put context to it. Like, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't follow anybody, anything. I stay away from cars. I have to get into a car to get to work. But then
That's
I try
the extent
to erase,
of it at this point.
I try to erase the memory of driving to work.
So, Dave, introduce yourself. I know you've been on the show, and I know most everybody knows you, but just in case, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Dave Macholz. I'm the president and CEO of AvTECC, which, I see you kind of smiling. You're like, that's kind of a new thing.
Yeah,
right?
new addition, huh?
And I think that's probably to your point. I was spent 15 years in education and left my full-time role at the end of August, 24.
Holy cow,
So
dude.
yeah,
Big
it's,
steps.
Yeah, big step, and a step in the right direction. It's been something that you guys know I've been passionate about for a long time, and addressing some of the things that in our industry seem to be recurring. And
Yeah, we've been talking about, consistently talking about this is an issue and this is a thing. So before, let's go into it. Before education, what were you doing?
before education,
Yeah.
well, so it's kind of an interesting story. My grandfather worked for Snap-on.
Yeah.
So when I was a little bit of a kid, I was instantly interested in cars and tools, and he had a 64.5 Mustang convertible
Oh,
in
man.
the garage that didn't run. So that was a fascinating item because I'm like, Grandpa, how do we get this thing running?
Yeah, yeah.
But when I was about 12, he was in the Snap-on diagnostic program. They had just bought out Sun Equipment.
Yeah.
And that's when the red brick scan tool came out. And we spent summers with them. So we lived in Pennsylvania at the time. They lived in New York. And we'd go there for the summer. And I went to work with my grandfather like pretty consistently. So I learned diagnostics through watching my grandfather show these guys how to fix cars with tools.
That's so
And,
cool.
I just got fascinated with it. And, interestingly enough, my grandfather was also the person that when I graduated high school, him and the guy that I worked for, I started working at a Texaco station when I was 14 pumping gas.
Yeah.
When I was 15 or 16, I started working in the shop. And when my parents said, well, what are you going to do after, high school? I said, well, what I'm doing right now, I'm going to work in the garage. And they're like, no. So my grandfather and the guy that I worked for at the time, his name was John Bryant. He's unfortunately since passed away.
Yeah.
They sat me down on the sidewalk in front of the Texaco gas station and said, son, this is probably not the industry you want to go into. And I can remember that being like earth-shattering. Yeah. And but that's really kind of like take these, experiential learning experiences of what you experienced as a person, as a kid.
Yeah.
Those are kind of like some of the moments that have propelled me to what I'm doing now.
For sure.
Right?
And like those core memories, right? They become a core memory.
Oh, totally. And it's funny. I always say to my wife with our kids, I'm like, let them experience it. If they experience it and they learn it the hard way, that's okay. Because that's how, as human beings, we learn, which kind of plays into what we're doing also, right? Like you have to be able to do these things. But, from that perspective, like hearing that, like, don't go into the industry, like, well, why?
Yeah.
And
you're not going to stop me. I just need to know why.
Yeah. And I said, well, why? And he's like, well, most of it's not professionalized. You're going to go work for somebody. And the shop owner who's sitting next to me, he's sitting there at the same time going, yeah, property taxes and this and that and the other thing and everything that was involved in running a business. But really, at the end of the day, what it came down to for both of them was that there was not a professional pathway to enter the industry, climb a ladder, let's say, or even know what that ladder really was. Business ownership obviously was an option, but you guys know, and you've worked with a lot of groups. That's not an easy road to haul, So I think that really stuck with me. But so fast forward, Went to school for music. I don't know if you guys knew that or not.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah. So I went to school for music. Alternatively, when I worked at the gas station, I would pump gas. The shop would close around 6 o'clock, and I'd stay on till 10. So in New York State, there was a school music association. It's called NISMA.
Right.
So I played the trombone, and was in the NISMA contest every spring. So I would sit. I was a full service gas station, so I'd sit in this. It looked like kind of like a bubble, because there was these glass windows, and it was just this open area with a counter, and there was no, quick mart or anything like that. So I'm sitting in there playing the trombone, from 6 to 10, a few nights a week. And people would drive by there like, it looks like a Norman Rockwell painting, right?
So I guess what this means is that I'm going to have to go out here and tell Brian he doesn't need to hire a saxophone player for the event anymore.
Yeah. Just have Dave bring his trombone. But
that's awesome.
But, that also plays into this whole thing too, because how do you get good at something? Mm-hmm. Right? You got to practice it.
Yeah.
And is there such thing as good and bad practice? But so kind of hold on to that. But, so I went to school for music. I went to Queens College, which is in the City of New York system.
Yeah.
My trombone teacher, one of them was, he played Broadway. That was his full-time gig. He played a show that probably everybody knows, Phantom of the Opera. That was his full-time gig every night. Broadway, he went in and did that.
So cool.
Yeah. And then he had some changes in his schedule and whatnot. And he said, I can't teach you anymore. I want you to go take lessons with my friend Dave Finlayson, who is the second trombone player in the New York Philharmonic and still is. So I did that for quite a few years. And, the irony was all my friends who were musicians were going and playing a gig and making $25 on the weekend. And I was going home and I was working at the shop and I was making $250 for the weekend or whatever the number was. I don't remember exactly, but it was like exponentially higher than what they were making. And I'm like, wait a second, I didn't go to school. So long story short. I
was going to ask, like they were like, hey, don't get an automotive. Go play the trombone.
Yeah.
Lots of money in that.
Well, I think the thought would have been like you get into a teaching job. There's a pension involved there in the New York system. So those are good jobs. And by the way, just because you don't understand this is like a Northeast thing in Boston. It's like, hey, go get a good job so you can get the bennies. Yeah. Like that's what you need. You got to get good bennies. What do the bennies look like? Exactly.
Like, that's all that mattered. It didn't matter with like, do you like, is it your life's purpose? No. It's a flipping benefits. Oh, but the bennies are great. Okay, that sounds good.
Be miserable, but get great benefits.
You got the benefits.
It's definitely a factor.
Yeah.
But those were some of the thoughts that I had as a kid going, okay, what do I want to do when I grow up? Long story short, I finished music school. And I'm like, okay, I got two options. I can either go and take auditions, which I wasn't really ready to do. I was okay at the trombone, but I wasn't at that level. So I said, well, I got to probably spend some more time practicing. So what did I do? I went back to fixing cars. I opened the shop. I was always into classic Mustangs from my grandfather's time. I still had a 67. So we had a Mustang shop. And we did restorations and had, at one point I had like 3 68 GT500 KRs in the shop. With some really nice stuff. And I had
some really expensive stuff.
Yeah.
More expensive now than it was then, I'm sure. But
and I was a young, stupid kid. I was like 22 years old when I started it. Closed it by the time I was 26, I think.
What made you close it?
The economy tanked in like 2006, 2007 there.
Yeah.
And all the fun money, where the phone would ring every day, it just got eerily quiet.
Yeah.
Right? So everybody's fun money went away, and cash
that
flow
was where
gone.
you were working. Yeah.
Yeah. So we closed the shop, and at that point, I said, "Well, what am I going to do with my life?" And I went back. I was managing a shop, a chain store. It was called King Bear. I don't know if you're familiar.
Never
with that,
heard
but
of
it was
it.
a franchise that was up in the New York area, and there's another one called Great Bear, which, if you know Audra Forden.
Yeah.
If you know that name, Audra she was in, I think, the Great Bear franchise. So I don't know, all these similarly named franchises.
Yeah.
So I did that. And I'm like, what's the future hold? So my stepfather walks in one day and he says, you ever thought about teaching automotive? And I was like, what? Like, is that even a thing?
Right.
And he's like, no, there's a local school. And he had actually taken a sub job at a local BOCES, just to, again, going back to the benefits thing, that he was self-employed, so he needs some benefits. So he he had a part-time job working for what was called BOCES in the New York area. And that's where all your trade schools were. So I got a phone call from the principal there, and he said, "Hey, do you want to come in for an interview? It pays $90 a day." And I'm like, $90 a day? Like, I made better money 10 years ago, right? Working on cars than $90 a day. But I said, you know what? Let me give it a try and see what it's all about. So I went in. It was they called it an 811 classroom, which was basically 8 students, 1 teacher, who was me, and 1 aide. And it was a special career ed classroom, and it was special career ed, not for the fact that it was students with disabilities per se, but it was students that, let's say they had a rough upbringing and did not really find their way through school in a positive way. So that wound up being very eye-opening, because essentially you were supervising kids that had behavioral issues with power tools and cars. So what could go wrong?
No, that sounds fantastic.
But
they need an outlet.
Yeah. Like, why do you think?
Away.
Why do you think
hey.
I'm in automotive, bro? Like that.
Yeah.
Why we're all here.
But at the same time, it was fulfilling, because you'd see some of these young people kind of turn their lives around and take interest in doing something, and realize, wow, maybe I could do something with my life other than what I've experienced. Which a lot of them, the experience was not positive. So anyhow, they offered me a full-time job the next year, and that was eye-opening, because all of a sudden you have weeks off for February break, and you're like, what is this all about? Right? And having worked in service businesses, whether it was music or cars, right? You're
on it all the time.
You work when you work, right? You got to pay the bills. So shortly thereafter, got introduced to sort of the whole idea of accreditation and how schools determine what their curriculums look like. And that was eye-opening. So after my first year in special career ed, I got moved to sort of the mainstream vocational education building. And I taught next to a guy named Steve Celeste, who is just a phenomenal guy. His father was also an automotive teacher in the same classroom that he was in.
Wow, that's cool.
So he's like, here's where this thing came from. This is what it looked like 50 years ago. Yeah. And you guys I've probably said this to you guys on other conversations, but one of the first things that stuck out to me was we had 4 teachers, I think, teaching 2 areas, like subject areas apiece. Right. And we had 15, 16, 17-year-old kids learning manual and automatic transmissions. And I'm like, not that you don't want them to know that, but like I said to Steve, I said, these guys have jobs? And he's like, no. And I'm like, why are we taking apart 4L60s with 16-year-old kids that have never done this before?
Yeah, and will never have a chance to use that knowledge in a quick enough fashion that it's valuable
what are you talking
knowledge.
About? We have a shortage of transmission rebuilders.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah, there's no doubt. But I'm just saying,
we should
like,
be pumping 16-year-olds into, hey,
I don't have a problem with that.
CVT.
I'm just saying,
we're going to show you how to whittle the parts.
Yeah. There's no,
they don't make them.
I was getting ready to say, there's no help for a CVT, buddy.
Yeah. But, I guess that was just another one of those experiential learning moments where you go, why are we doing the things that we do? Why did my grandfather and the guy I work for not want me to go into this industry? How are we training people? And these experiences, fast forward 15 years, I spent 15 years in education. I was an instructor at a community college after the BOCES gig, Honda Pack, Toyota T10, became the department chair. When you want to move up in the world in the academic space, you go in and you get further degrees. So I got my master's in higher education. And in 2020, COVID happened, obviously. We're sitting at home. And I said to my wife, it's time to kind of figure out what's next. And at that point, it was either, I went as far as having a conversation with her. I'm like, I think I'm going to pick the trombone up again and take some auditions just for the heck of it, because I think it would be fun. And I think I'm ready for a change. I said, I need to do something different.
Right.
So I said, and anyhow, we wound up settling on it. And I shouldn't say settling on, because I was really excited about it too. I found a workforce development PhD program at Old Dominion University, and went and started my PhD in education. And then in the first year of that, I guess it was June of 2021. Mickey Kozlowski, Dr. Kozlowski at Old Dominion, had him for a class, and he says, all right, you got to pick what your dissertation topic is going to be. And I'm like, oof, dissertation. He's like, you better like it because you're going to write probably about 150 to 200 page paper, and you're going to spend probably the next 5 years of your life on this.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay. Got all this, all these things that are going on in the industry. And, fast forward to my position as a dean, having those experiences I had as a kid. Now a parent's asking me, should my son or daughter go into this?
Yeah.
Right? Can I confidently say that every time I had that conversation, I was like, absolutely they should? No, I can't say that.
Right.
And why? You look at median salary, right? And I think that's something we've talked about on the show before, but I think it's right now, if you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's around $48,000, right? So you take 800,000 people in the population, that means half of those people, 400,000, are making $48,000 or less annually.
Yeah.
Right? That's a lot of people making not a considerable amount of money.
Right. Barely enough to survive in some cases.
I'd have to look at the statistics. Yeah. Like, what are you putting in there? Lubies from Jiffy Lube? Like,
well, that's probably a big percentage breakdown, right? Mm-hmm. So, but then, the contrast to that is like even Wrenchway, I think recently has posted some information where they've surveyed some people and gotten a lot higher numbers. In fact, that's Mark Wilson and Jay Goonin at Wrenchway were kind enough to give me access to that data set to use for my dissertation research. So we added a couple questions about certification to that. So more or less what my dissertation topic was to try to better understand if we do a better job of professionalizing our industry through certification, can people make more money? And the answer is, at least if you ask Jay and Mark, I think at this point they'll tell you yes. I'm still running those numbers to see exactly how that pans out. I'm thinking it probably points to the direction of yes, they do better. And there's some reasons for it. And you have to kind of put self-selection bias, into that equation. And if you don't know what that is, so basically the idea is for the people in your audience, if I run a survey.
Not for you, Lucas, because I'm sure you know what it is.
Well, here's the thing. If I run a survey, right, and I put it out there and I say, hey, I'd like you to answer questions on my survey about your income, right? Do you think people that are excited about their income and excited about their certification are probably likely to respond in a positive way to that? Yes. Do you think the contrast is also true? Yeah. Right? So there's some self-selection bias where they say, I'm volunteering for this because I'm excited about it. Yeah. Right? Now, you can't discount that because those people still are probably making the money that they're saying that they're making. Right. But you have to have that as an identified factor to say, like, okay, that has something to do with it too.
For sure.
But that was my interest. And, what started happening is that you start to peel back the layers of the onion here. You've got, anywhere between 40 and 70% attrition in our industry in the first 3 years, depending on who you ask. Some will tell you more. I talked to a couple of OEMs that have said maybe 75 to 80.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
you go,
for sure.
Holy crap. Right? 80% attrition in the first 3 years. How do I, as an academic dean, say this is a good field to go in if these kids are just going to get chewed like it's
difficult?
You tell them not to go to the dealers. Like that's the solution.
So maybe that's one piece of it, right?
But the dealers are funding the school, so you can't.
It's a tricky piece, right? Because if you think about the world of the education piece that we're in, right? You need cars, you need materials. Where do those come from? Federal grants, which, by the way, that's a topic of conversation right now because a lot of those things are being challenged, and eliminated, paused.
They're not easy to get either.
They're not. They're truly not. Not to the scale where we would really need to be to run the programs that we right now have on paper that we say that we're running. So that's a challenge. But going back to the whole idea of professionalization and looking at some of the numbers behind this stuff, what you see is, on average, any industry, if there's a voluntary certification process, it's as much as 14 to 16% positive factor. How that equates to dollars, essentially, it's they would call it an earnings the term is escaping me at the moment, but it's essentially a benefit, a 14 to 16% better on average, how that person might do annually as opposed to somebody who doesn't have it. But what was never really broken down well is having that by vocation. So what I wanted to look at was, okay, well, how do automotive technicians do? So if you start to look at that, a couple things more recently, like in the last 2 years, have you guys ever heard of Burning Glass Institute? They do a lot of research on jobs and things like that. They did some research on job postings on Indeed and some of these different job forums where people would ask for ASE certified technicians versus non-certified technicians. And the returns were actually pretty considerable. I think they determined that on average, the ones that asked for ASE certified technicians would wind up paying on average $9,500 a year more. Right. Which would mean if you were somebody that was coming out of a high school or a college program and you were ASE certified, your benefit to having that, right, as a signal of what your skills or whatever your knowledge were at the very least, right, would give you that type of benefit. So then what happens is really weird, though, in the research. If you look at the research and you say, all right, well, what are employers' perceptions of certified versus non-certified employees? There's 2 dissertations that are out there that support the idea that there's no perceived benefit amongst the employers between certified and uncertified people. So 2 things can be true here, right? The first thing that could be true is that the certification gives you a credential to land a first job, which to people coming out of, a school, very valuable, right? But the other thing that could also be true is that what does the certification mean, and how does that affect an employer's perception on what that means, right? And that's where we kind of come to the performance-based certification piece, right? Yeah. So I spent 2 weeks ago, I went through and I did my ASE renewal. Right. So clearly it's something I believe in.
Did you do the web renewal or did you do
the app?
Right.
Yeah. So I did it through the app, which is pretty cool because they push you the questions kind of on a weekly basis. And even if you don't take it too seriously and you're screwing around and you kind of miss a question, it'll push it back to you the next week or something like that. Kind of an interesting way of doing it. But I keep them current. I believe in it. I just don't believe it's enough.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the genesis of AvTECC. These life experiences that I've had, in the industry with people that were very influential on me as a young person that have stuck with me, right? To now you go, well, here we are as an industry. We want people to come into this industry. The technological shift in our industry is ridiculous.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's only going to get more intense.
It is. So we have to have people that can teach themselves how to learn.
Yeah.
Right. So rather than hitting them with all sorts of content, teach them how to learn, teach them how to do certain things that are going to be core components that move, with them throughout the entirety of their careers. So that was kind of the genesis of what AvTECC is. AvTECC, we started in February of 24. Right. So just a little over a year ago. And the idea behind that was to kind of reimagine what we're doing with education and credentialing, in terms of our industry and looking at it in a different frame of mind.
Right.
So that's kind of where we are, and that's kind of how this thing has started.
So I've got to drop something in here because I'm thinking about this as you're talking, because we're at ETI Tool Tech 2025, right? And you're talking about the fact that your grandfather worked for Snap-on in the diagnostic division, and there's a chance he could have attended one of these events all those years ago, right? Because ETI has been around for a long time and a huge component in that. So I think that's really cool to think back about. And man, I was so excited to see you actually take this because you'd been on the show and we had talked about this concept, right? Yep. Because it was very important. And what little involvement I've had with education, right? Because if you look at what happens, especially from the high school into probably more so community college than trade schools, but if you look at what happens in a lot of cases, a guidance counselor will push a student who they feel isn't going to succeed anywhere else into this layer of skilled trade learning, right? And they put them down there and they kind of just toss them in the basement and think, there you go. And our industry needs a very, very different person than that right now.
That's how we got all the 40 to 60-year-old techs, just so you know.
Right. Well, but I
all
mean, even beyond
They're all
that,
the troubled students he got stuck with.
I will tell you this. Eric Mortensen is the teacher at our local high school. And I am so amazed at the fact that he takes these kids that are often, just like you said, they've been through stuff. They've not had a good experience up to this point. And because he's passionate about what he's talking about and he really cares about the kids, and it's not about like, hey, I'm just here to get my paycheck and I'm here for the bennies, as David says, right? It's amazing to see some of these kids make a change and make a turn. And like, to me, that's what education's supposed to be. And you don't really see that much anymore. But that's what it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah, and I think there's definitely examples that you probably don't see. I mean, there's some very, very strong CTE programs across the U.S. that are historically well-funded. Yeah. They get Perkins funding that supports, automotive programs, all the trade programs. There's definitely a need for renewed emphasis. I don't know that you'll ever change the students that you get. Yeah. And you get a mixed assortment of students. But this is the one thing that I would say. Many of the people that I know that are successful in our industry were not the traditional student.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's interesting. And the reason that I bring that up is if you think about it, how do we gauge that a student was a traditional student or not?
Yeah.
Test scores. Yeah. How, reading comprehension.
Standardized
maybe
testing.
To a certain extent. But, some people just don't take tests well.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of what we're addressing with, what I would call performance-based assessment.
That's so true. And he's not been there yet, but leadership intensive through the Institute, because one of the huge components of that, right? Because it's really a psychology class beyond anything else, but they talk about all the different learning styles and all the different types of human beings that are out there and how do we perceive information and how do we learn, right? Because that's an important component. We tend to look at it from this perspective that everybody learns the way I learn. But when you go through classes like you've been through, or even just a brief touch like you go through in Leadership Intensive, you realize, holy cow, there's a lot of different ways people perceive information and retain information. And so when you dig into that and you begin to look at especially automotive technicians, they're very good at deductive reasoning. A lot of them are not good at reading comprehension, which is something we're going to have to change, right? Sure. Like service information's getting intense.
No. With our last guest, that's going to fix that. It's just going to be TikToks.
Oh, no.
Listen, you can fight it out with him. You guys can fight it out. The future is TikToks.
TikToks and AI, right?
Yeah. TikToks and AI. Yeah. He's going to speak tomorrow morning.
Awesome.
No reading involved. Actually, will there be some reading because you got to have the flashing words to keep the eyes, engaged in there? Like, ooh, word.
Well, ironically, if you could use audio cues and audio prompts to prompt AI to tell you how to do something, that's probably not completely impossible. But to your point on the learning style piece, nobody's got really one learning style. Like for a while, there was some thought in the educational community that people would adopt one. It's usually people have more than one, but they'll have areas of emphasis, let's say, right? So kinesthetic learners, right? Your learners that are traditionally people that learn hands-on, they may also exhibit other areas. They might be visual learners, as an example. And there's different modalities within that, or, in terms of learning styles traditionally. But, it's one of the most interesting pieces of research that I came across in terms of testing, right? So you talk about cognitive exams. Wouldn't you know there's a correlation between, and we've probably talked about this in the past, but there's a correlation between student success in math, I think it was trigonometry and physics, and how you scored on that and how well you do on ASE entry-level exams.
Really?
Yeah. And you know who did the worst on ASE entry-level exams?
Who?
The traditional CTE student that did not do well in math, science, physics.
Right.
So that is another unique challenge, right? Is the tool we're using to assess cognitive ability or performance the right tool?
Exactly. Is it the effective tool that we should be using? Did we go to the toolbox and pull the wrong tool out to do this?
Yeah. And you look at learning styles, right?
Yeah.
The attack, and this isn't just specific to ASE, this is across the entire spectrum of learning and assessment. There's an attack on standardized assessments. Why? Right? Because certain portions of the population don't do very well on them.
Yeah.
Right? So is that a measurement? And in fact, ETS, Educational Testing Services, they designed the GRE. There's even some questions as to the validity of the GRE. There was a meta-analysis that was done a couple years ago. Basically what that is a data scientist goes out and looks at all of the research that's been done on the area of, okay, how do students with the GRE, a passing rate on the GRE, do in graduate school and beyond? And this meta-analysis basically came back and said that there's little to no impact on how somebody does with the GRE to how they do in graduate school. And you've seen many graduate school programs, including the one that I'm in, waive the requirement.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not realize that.
Yeah. So you look at that and you go, wow, that's a whole lot of money, right? For everybody that had to go to graduate school, that had to pay for that exam, where now that exam is
What happened
not,
to the exam? What about the association that was putting the exam on?
they do quite well.
They still doing okay?
They look them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're one of the multi-billion-dollar not-for-profit organizations that are out there.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yep.
This whole conversation takes me back to the Ken Robinson video that I talk about sometimes. Is that
Hey, listen, tell that story again. You're going to offend our listeners. That was for you, Zeb. I saved you the hassle listening to that story again. Anyway, so what is it that you're going? No, don't do that.
Finish your question.
So you start a company that does, you'll have to explain, you have to flesh that out. Again,
So what, AvTECC?
don't know anything about
Yeah, because it came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, so
That's how
AvTECC,
the companies get started, out of nowhere. Like, what are you talking about?
No, I'm just saying, like, he stormed onto the scene and became the next big thing.
well, it's nice to hear that, because you don't ever really know what the perception is when you start something like this as to what people are thinking about it, So that's awesome to hear. That's the hope, is that people think that it's something that will be useful.
Yeah.
But really our whole interest was this. Like, I was very involved with the Toyota T10 program. Joe Myers, who's now the vice president of AvTECC, was the technician development manager for Toyota.
Right.
And he retired back in November. And one of the things that him and we worked together for close to 12 years with the T10 program. One of the things that we really felt that was the differentiator in Toyota's training program was they had skills validations built in throughout the program. So in understanding the concepts of why people push back on traditional competency-based, or I should say traditional multiple choice exams, right? It's that, well, what do they measure, right?
Yeah.
So they can measure cognitive ability, they can measure reasoning, they can measure there's a demonstration that they had to do something to get that.
Right.
But where it fell short in those couple dissertations that I measured was that the employers didn't feel that they measured skill, right?
Yeah.
And there's this dialogue that's become sort of pervasive throughout our industry that schools aren't doing a good job, right? The students aren't coming to the workplace with the skills that they need. And, it kind of gut punches you a little bit as a teacher, because
Putting
these
the work
guys are
in.
working their butts off, right? But I think what's happened is they're working on being content deep and not skills deep.
Right.
So you're addressing, from the perspective of the student, like, okay, well, knowledge, right? Recall. Can they remember certain facts? And that's not unimportant.
Yeah.
But if that's the majority of what they're doing, right? When they get to work, the day they leave our programs and they're asked to rack a $150,000 car, right? And the thing falls off the lift, are we surprised that that's happening?
That's what, a Camry now, $150,000.
Yeah.
So let me ask.
That's not. I should say that's not the norm, right?
Right.
But when that one thing does happen, it's a
We begin to
reflection
judge
on-
them, and we begin
exactly.
to.
I don't. How do you train that in without time, though?
Well,
yeah.
That's the interesting thing that I'm curious about, because, you know, from my involvement with education and watching it and watching them educate some of these, especially the high school students, and the process of bringing them up through that, they have very limited time with them, right? And our high school teacher has said more than once, like, I'm really just trying to get them to where they're safe. Yep. And he went to the CTE director. Now, she was amazing, right? Really good to work with. He went to her and said, I know that you want me to teach this curriculum like by the book, but I'm telling you, this curriculum is broken. And I understand that I have to be ASE accredited, but I'm telling you it's broken, right? Like this is not going to get us the desired outcome that we have.
Yeah.
Let me manipulate this in a way that's going to work for the student.
Yeah, and I think to that point, you know, it's not an intention thing. I think the intent has always been to build quality programs, right?
Yeah.
I think what, you know, we're kind of using as a tagline for AvTECC, reimagining the way that we're doing things, right? Take the pieces of this, dump them onto the table, and put this back together in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, so from our perspective, the way that we see this is one of the things that's clearly evidently missing is the skills development piece.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pieces that underpin that. But when you look at the amount of content that has to fit in, we've had this conversation, that has to fit into a 2-year program of study.
It's unbelievable.
It doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to make a decision about, well, what of those items are you not going to do? Right. So, and if you look at the percentage of what a student is going to have to be able to do when they enter the world of work, you can kind of take a little bit better picture of what that might look like. You know, so from our perspective, it goes beyond just saying like, hey, put a test into your program and test and make sure that the students can be able to do this.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things that we're walking a very fine line with is if you talk to most traditional certification programs, the certification and the training are, there's a hard, fast line in the sand, right? But today's credentialing agencies, a lot of them are looking at like, is that working?
Yeah.
Right? So the testing is over here specifying one thing. And let's just say it right now. If a student goes through a 2-year program and we assess them when they leave the program, it's too late.
Yeah.
Right? So there's no way, and we call that summative assessment when it's all at the end. Right? So there's no way to formatively like take that and put that into the program and focus on performance improvement, right? Not so much how much content did we deliver, but did we move the needle from when Johnny or Susie walks into the program to when they leave? And that's really where our focus is not being so deep in content, but peeling that back to saying, how do we align training to what people have to do? And I'll give you a perfect example. I had a presentation that I would do in my AUT 112 class when I was first at Suffolk. It was a 2-hour presentation on oil. Is it good information? Of course it is.
Yeah.
Did I need to do 2-hour lecture on oil?
Probably not.
Probably not. What did the student have to know? What does the manufacturer recommend? How do I put the oil in? How do I get the oil out? How do I make sure that the level is correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Not, let me tell you about API and...
Yeah.
So it's reframing what we're doing.
There's no better person to ask than this. And I've got a little bit of an understanding of it. When we look at the high schools and we look at the community colleges, where does that curriculum come from? Because it's a very interesting process for how that curriculum's developed. Where does that curriculum come from that we're teaching kids now?
So predominantly, if they're accredited programs, right, it's through ASE.
Okay.
And that essentially, when ASE created it, I think it was back in the late 80s, it was done because previous to ASE, there was nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't discount the work that ASE's done. They've done a really good job of trying to define minimum standards.
For sure.
Right? And in fact, there's other organizations, believe it or not, within education that actually look at what they did and said, how can we do the same thing?
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So I don't want to discount that. I think it's just not enough, right?
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it is this. You can have a minimum standard, right? And you could say, well, as long as you check all of these boxes, you're an accredited program. So that's really where most of it comes from. Things like what tools they have, faculty or, teacher credentials, minimum pieces that determine what the program is. Most of the content that's being delivered historically was built off of the 8 ASE core content areas.
Right.
Right. And that was because there was an exam that was supposed to be representative of the industry, right? That at the end of that program, if the focus was on passing that test, right, then you should have a pretty holistic curriculum.
Yeah.
Right. Challenge now is, okay, in 1972, there were 3 car manufacturers that were 95% of the market.
And the cars were fairly similar.
Fairly similar. Everybody probably had a V6. Everybody probably had had a 6-cylinder. Everybody probably had an 8-cylinder. Firing order was different.
Yeah.
Location of the distributor was different, right? 72, emission systems, EGR valve, maybe a smog pump, if the vehicle had California
Pretty
emissions at that
straightforward,
time. I think, it was 68 was sort of when all of that started coming out. So there wasn't much technological difference from brand to brand.
Right.
Fast forward to now, it's now become nearly impossible to build a single cognitive exam to cover
For sure.
all the vehicles that are out there. So that's where I think we're in a bit of trouble, right? We've got a system that was set up around 8 specific areas, which I think even what we're doing is built around sort of the same core areas. But the content has become so deep that we've gone, we have to cover all this content instead of saying, let's make sure we have skilled people that leave our programs that are going to go out in the field and be successful.
One of the things that concerns me, and this may just be from the people that I've networked with and what I've seen personally, is it does feel like to some degree, because the credentialing programs, you have to be accredited. And so there's a process to become accredited. And they have, for lack of a better term, inspectors, right, that go out and they bring in a team of technicians, shop owners, service advisors to go through the accreditation process with this so-called inspector, right? I have seen on multiple occasions where there's been some noise or some, over time, something gets bigger and hairier and meaner than you expected for it to be. It becomes more complex. And so certain schools were getting accredited when they probably shouldn't have been. And in some cases, we're not exactly meeting the standards that we're supposed to meet, but because you have this big budget and we don't want to upset you, then we're not gonna do anything about that. And then, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because one of the biggest beefs, and this came from instructors. This didn't come from students. This didn't come from techs. This came from instructors who said, wait a minute, you're giving me a credential program that now you want me to lower the standards in the credentialing. And we're going to offer this kind of like budget rate ability to credential something, right? It's not going to be the full credential, but we're going to call it this credential. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, also, this organization over here, big organization, has all these oil change places under its belt, and they want a lower ability so they can say their technicians are ASE certified. What does that say to the student? What does that say to the technician that worked really hard to get all of the certifications? How does that play out in your mind?
So I think a couple of things happen here behind the scenes that people don't think about and don't see when they think of it from the end looking back.
Yeah.
I think the first part of that is, could a high school student take a professional level ASE and take and pass it?
No. No way.
So there's not really an industry recognized credential at the high school level in the automotive field that a student could take and pass. So I don't remember the exact year, and I should know.
That's not true of community college, though.
No. So
By
it
the
shifts in
time you get the
community
second-
college.
Yeah, 2 years of community college, and you can pass all ASEs without having stepped into a.
Maybe.
I don't know.
No, not maybe 100%.
I don't know, man.
Dude, I've seen it happen.
That might be
I
like
attempted it myself. I had showed up to the class to the testing day, the first day. I would have done it the first day. Now I showed up and I misread the schedule, so I only showed up for the second day. But the test that I took, I passed.
right.
I had 0 days in the shop. I knew my book. That was it.
Right.
And I took the practice tests, and that was it. And I attempted the L1.
Yeah, there are schools that can teach to content,
Yeah.
right? And you probably wouldn't have to touch a car very much, and you could probably get
The
them to
content
pass.
is there. It's the student whether decides it. But
That-
regardless, though, and I will say 80% of the students in my automotive class could barely read. They were there for a reason.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that shouldn't be the case ever. 0 experience, and I am master level, whatever, because I could pass the test. Get out of here.
Well, so here's what else happened in our industry, right? In most professionalized industries, I always use my wife as an example because she's the perfect picture of a professional. She's a PA, physician assistant, and she's worked in heart surgery for almost her entire career in that. So she's been around high-performing people in her field.
Right.
Really, there's kind of like they talk about this 3-legged stool. One of them is the preparatory program that you went to, right? So for her school. The second piece was the credentialing exam, which they have a very robust credential. But the third piece that they have is either a fellowship or a pretty intensive internship that's prescriptive and it's very intentional.
It's laid out. It has a strategy behind it.
It is. And believe it or not, there are folks in that community that want improvements in their field in this regard too. So the skills-based piece is not unique to AvTECC. It's not unique to the automotive industry.
Right.
This is going across the entire world of work right now.
Yeah.
In our industry, when ASE was founded, they had a conundrum on their hands because there was no required schooling. There was no required internship, right? And now they're building a credential that is supposed to meet the requirements of the missing schooling component and the missing prescriptive work experience.
Sure.
And you're putting that on one body, which I would say is probably unfair, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, right, after 50 years, like I would hope that we were moving the needle closer to where we need to be. And I don't think we're there.
No, I'm 100% with you, and I think that's my biggest beef is between, I've said it before, the advertising budget alone bothers me, right? Because I kind of expect them to be out here helping market that this is what a professional automotive technician is, and this is how we define what a professional automotive technician is, but there is no marketing budget. Okay, well, help me understand that, right? Because I'm going to pay you to credential my guys. And I'm going to work with the schools who are accredited by your organization. And now I'm supposed to say, okay, they have this certification. I have asked my clients before, do you know what ASE stands for?
They have no idea.
Person.
You know what they ask? Are you guys certified? And I get that question from my customers, and I go,
Certified in what?
And they go, this is what they say. They go, I don't know. Isn't that something you're supposed to ask?
Well,
and I go, no.
Here's the irony to that whole thing. I don't think it's necessarily a marketing issue. I think we in the automotive industry think it's a marketing issue. Mm-hmm. Because
I'm going to challenge you on that. Nobody thinks it's a flipping marketing issue. I am saying it is a marketing to the consumer issue.
Yes, that's where
the consumer needs to know that there's a difference between an AAC certified technician and a non-AAC certified technician. If the consumer doesn't know, there is no demand. If there's no demand, there's no reason for them to exist. They are simply there taking up space and money and they get speaking gigs at rando places for some flipping reason. Like anybody gives two flips what they have to say about anything. And I'm sorry, the consumer drives the entire market.
Yeah.
So if the consumer is asking for ASE certified, if the consumer starts walking into shops saying, are you guys ASE certified? Because I'm not supposed to go anywhere unless I see the blue seal. All of a sudden, there will be a giant demand for I need to get my guys ASE certified.
Well, it's kind of like, so just to flip this, why don't people go and ask their doctors if they're certified?
Only because the government requires it, and they limit how many licenses they hand out.
Okay.
But I'll be honest with you. If I knew that I could go to Paco, and Paco was a doctor in Mexico, and Paco could prescribe me stuff, I'd go to Paco. I don't care. Like, can you hook me up or not?
Here's the point I was trying to make.
That's all I'm saying.
It's really hard to say, like, okay, so NCCER in the construction realm, they're responsible to market that their program is the differentiator between people being competent in a trade and not. Like, I guess my whole point is
they have the exact same problem, though.
But I think the bigger problem that we see it as an industry, but I think the consumer, most of them assume that we know what we're doing.
Right. They assume that you're certified. They assume there's some type of.
That is another problem, though.
So how do you overcome that with marketing? You know, well, that's a challenge.
I think you can overcome it with marketing. I'll give you and I'll show you why this is absolutely true. This is absolutely true.
Anytime he says it's absolutely true, you know it's only partially true.
No, I got this nailed down. Trust me. I've thought this through every which way I can possibly think this through. And here's the thing. Like, as far as construction goes, I'm sorry, like 99% of contractors are garbage. Mm-hmm. They are. They're absolute garbage. The workmanship is garbage. They do hack jobs. And the only thing holding them accountable are the code inspectors. But even then, they're corrupt too. That becomes a whole other issue. But I'm telling you, that's the only thing holding them accountable, because it's random Mexicans getting picked up from Home Depot. They get shipped off to the job site. They slap together the job. A good portion of them, look, I love to hire me some Mexicans. They're going to build me a deck, by the way, because man, if you find the right people, they are the best. What's the difference? They take pride in their work. It's not about the money. It's about the pride of workmanship, the craft. It's art to them, okay? You found a good one. 99% of them, hot garbage. The difference is, look at restaurants and chefs. Michelin star rated restaurants and chefs. I don't need to know where he went to school. I don't need to know, his accreditations. I don't need to know what kind of anything. I don't need to know. All I need to know is that is a Michelin-rated restaurant, and I will go pay $1,000 a plate to go to eat at that restaurant, and they're booked out for 6 months.
Right.
What made the difference there? The marketing of Michelin, and they put their star of approval on that restaurant.
Yeah.
We do the exact same thing in automotive, where ASE is pumping their multi-$100 million budget or whatever they can dump into marketing, pushing it out to the consumer, and all of a sudden, the same thing in the general contracting world. They could do the same thing there too, but they don't give two flips either. We can do the exact same thing and start putting that blue seal. They already do it with the blue seal. The problem is nobody knows what the hell that means. The only people that give two flips about that blue seal is AAA people. That's it.
I'm voting that we what's your logo color? Green, right? So I think we should make it the green seal now. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you that screw ASC. You guys need to make sure that, hey, we have some money set aside, at least regionally, whatever you have to do. We are going to pump out content for the consumer. You don't even have to market to shops. If the consumer, I don't understand, this is so backwards. If the consumer's asking, I need that green seal. What's it called? AvTECC?
Yep.
I need that AvTECC seal.
So this
is this an AvTECC certified shop? Yes, I am. No, I'm not. Holy crap, what is that? Google, hey, I need to get certified today.
Well, and
There's your marketing.
it's been spun so many ways at this point because you've got the Carfax certified shop and the Repair Pal certified shop, and you're literally just paying them to say. And nobody puts weight in those things, but it takes
Somehow BBB still
Yeah.
like
Well,
that
takes
extortion.
educating the consumer.
Yeah, and here's where I think, and what does AvTECC do, right? We didn't
Yeah.
really even talk about that. AvTECC was thought up and imagined to fill this gap where what does it mean to be certified? Does it
Yeah.
mean that you have knowledge, right? Does that certification's only as good as to the face validity of the certification,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So
100%.
if that certification means that you took a test really well, if people can't relate that to taking their car to the car dealership and having that result in it being repaired right the first time,
Yeah. Means
you've
nothing
shot
at all.
yourself in the foot with any type of marketing that you're going to
Absolutely.
do.
Yeah. I agree.
So what we're seeking to do with AvTECC is to have a performance-based certification model. What that means is technician or a student, and we're starting with the school population strategically because we need institutions to be able to deliver this at scale.
Yeah.
right.
So the idea behind this is if I want to pass an AvTECC certification, I have to demonstrate to a subject matter expert that I can do certain things against the checklist at 100% accuracy.
Yeah.
That means not everybody gets that test, right? You're not going to pass with a 70. So how we see that as a differentiator is in the face validity, right? The reason that a consumer is going to believe in something is they believe that they're getting a good meal when they go to a Michelin star restaurant.
Sure.
Right? And I'm not going to say that there's not ASE certified technicians whose skill is also good. What I'm saying is we don't know because that's not what we're measuring.
Right. Correct.
Right.
100%.
So
Exactly.
to us, it's not an either or thing. Do AvTECC instead of. It's
Yeah.
it's a complementary piece to what's already out there.
Yeah.
We don't have intention of going out and creating cognitive exams.
Yeah.
Right. Our intention is to measure what people can do. So we've started in a couple of areas. One is EV, right? Because if you get a 70% on a safety exam, let's say in the EV space,
Somebody could be.
and you're tasked to go, right. So does that mean 30% of the time you can touch 800 volts, right? Like probably not, right?
You can
So-
try.
yeah, so we started in that space and we came out with, we're calling it our EV Safe certification, which is basically show us that you can validate, select personal protective equipment, that you can select the tools that you would require to just shut down a high voltage system, de-energize a high voltage system of a vehicle, do it safely, do the prescribed things that would be involved in if you've got an 800 volt system and you're going to shut that vehicle down, lockout, tag out, absence of voltage measurement. So not necessarily new ideas per se,
for sure.
but taking that and assessing it in a different way. Show me that you can do it.
Yeah.
Here it is. Here's all the stuff that you need to do. Go do it. And you would be surprised how quickly you find out that your training is flawed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
for
yeah.
sure.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Wait a second. Why can't these guys do this? And you
Yeah.
go, well,
By the way-
I didn't train to that.
I want to tell Lucas this quick story here real quick. We get this Chevy Cruze that comes in, not a Chevy Cruze. What's the Volt?
Volt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has a code in there that says that it is the charge port is now like grounded to the body or some nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay, my tech is a little freaked out by high voltage systems for some reason. I don't know. And so he's like, hey, I've got a test for this, figure out what's going on, yada, yada, whatever. So we sell like $250 of testing. And I told him, I'm like, now this is like your first go around. Take your time. Here's all of your PPE. I got him the full get up and I said, take your time. I understand because he came up with a testing protocol. Like he's like, okay, I'm going to look at the wiring diagram. I'm going to figure out what would cause this code. And he kind of came up with what he was going to go and test. So he runs through the test and he's like, dude, everything's testing properly. Like, I don't know. And he's like, but I need this like ohm meter, mega ohm meter or something or another. I don't know. And I said, okay, well, I don't have that. I ordered one. And I said, there you go. Another day, whatever. he probably spent 5 or 6 hours just testing things on this. And he's like, everything is passed. So we call the customer up. We're like, say, hey, everything is passing. Everything seems to be okay. She's like, yeah. Do you think that had anything to do with the accident I got in? I'm like, what? And yeah, so I got into this accident and took it to a body shop. They fixed it up. That was like 2 weeks ago. But then this light came on. Like, what? Oh, no. There was no light. This was a stored code that apparently the collision shop hadn't bothered
to clear.
Another code had come on that was related to something different. But when we pull the codes, hey, there's this giant like red flag here saying that this charge port is grounded to the body. We need to check into that before, we touch your car and get electrocuted or whatever. And she approved it. And the other issue, I don't remember what the hell it was. But we went through all this testing and like now we know to ask, like, hey, has this car been at the collision? But what kind of collision shop doesn't clear the codes?
About 60%
one that
of
probably that has not been trained or certified.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, so just to that point, the thing that
I
cracks
bet
me
you
up
went
is,
to the dealer. That would really freak you out then.
Yeah, well-
Left the Chevy dealership without a clear the codes.
But to your point, right? A few years ago when collision industry started talking about pre and post scan, I was like,
Yeah.
that's not
Wait a
something
minute.
that already gets done. Like we assume, right?
They are a wild bunch, buddy. Let me tell you.
The fix, by the way, was to update. There was a module that required a programming update. You update the program, you clear the code, it fixes the car.
December that worked for me is a collision estimator, and she sent me a text that came from one of her texts the other day, and it says something to the effect of, you didn't get me time to wipe the sanding dust off, and you need to add the time for removing the tape, and you need to add the time for they've got a list of things like wash car, do this. I mean, it's just like a list of
Well, it's because these are the insurance companies, dude.
I know, dude, it's crazy.
To your point though, on on all of these stories, the thing that I hear is we have not done a good job as an industry to make sure that the people coming into the industry have a fundamental knowledge of basic things that we look at and we assume that they would know.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of that is like going back to the educational system. We've tried to hit, even in the schools, right? And here's the thing. Nobody's required to go to school in our industry, right? Which should they be? Probably. Should there be some sort of requirement for training? Probably.
Yeah,
that would
for
probably
sure.
help a lot of this, right? That's a whole other thing to fix, right? Because you're going against voluntary structures, you say regulation and everybody gets nervous.
Freaked out.
But at the same time, right, there's a pretty good reason why a lot of industries were regulated, right? I'll just leave it at that.
David's going to be
get
convinced it's not
accused
going
of,
to fix it.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't fix it. If it did, Canada wouldn't have any problems.
That's true.
But they do. They
I
have the
mean, it's
exact same
Canada.
problem.
They've got Jeff Compton. They've got all the problems they need.
I'm just saying, they have all of the regulations. They do require schooling. They require like an apprenticeship and
Yeah.
Guess what? Exact same problems in
Still not
competent
perfect.
techs.
So let me ask you this then.
Yeah.
All right. So I see that AvTech can be.
But I do agree with you, like required training. Sorry. The required training like that.
Yeah.
If the fix actually would be for the shops to demand it of their technicians coming in, but there's always going to be that shady shop owner doesn't give two flips and they just need a warm body and sorry.
Right.
So let's say, because like I wholly believe what you're doing, like I'm 100% behind it.
Yeah.
I think it is a huge part of what's been missing in the industry. And I want our listeners to get behind AvTech, and I want our industry to get behind it and make sure that we're propelling it and demanding it, right? So what's the next step for us? How does the industry help you accomplish that?
It's a great question, right? Starting this has been somewhat of a labor of love, right? In where, historically, these types of groups are formed out of industry associations or some place that has a revenue generation base.
Right. And this
was kind of like, we have the concept. And I don't mean to say this in the wrong way, but people pay people like me to come in and do this for associations.
Yeah.
I had the opposite. I'm the person that can do this for associations that started an association that doesn't have the revenue generation. Right? So I have sort of the opposite problem is we have a good model.
Yeah.
So now we need industry support. So we've been piloting this. Just last week we went and we did this sort of voluntarily for Mazda. John Davison, who's on our board of directors, is the training manager for Mazda North America. And we were invited to come in and pilot our EV certification for their instructors, which was awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
We'd like some more opportunities like that to come in and do that for those types of groups to get some validity, but also hopefully have them say, boy, we kind of moved away from third-party conformity assessment because it didn't align, but man, this makes a ton of sense. And we think that over time that really is going to take hold. So in the short term, we've done a couple things. We're working to engage some industry partners. We have some corporate sponsorship levels available that people can find on our website, which is avtech.org, which is AVTECC.org. And by the way, that stands for Advanced Vehicle Technology Education and Credentialing Coalition.
That's a mouthful.
It's
right
a mouthful.
there.
And if you look for a 3-digit or a three-letter acronym in this day and age,
You're
you're
not
not
going to
find
it.
it. So that's a part of it, is the naming, the domain, how to get that to fit, but also kind of talking about what we're doing, advancing the industry to advanced technologies through reimagining what it is that we're doing. So if you visit our website, there are abilities to become individual founding partners on multiple levels to do that, because we're a 501c3 that's completely tax deductible. But that's the type of support we need. We need grassroots support. If this is something that's going to stick, we're going to need corporate partners. We're going to need somebody to say, hey, we want to adopt this and we want to make this a part of what we're doing. We've been asked, well, is this industry recognized? The answer is yes. Right, because we've empaneled industry people to build this. So,
100%,
for example, when we built EV Safe, we grabbed people from Rivian, Mazda, Ford, Toyota, the aftermarket. We had people from Autel. We had people from TopDon, people from some of the National Science Foundation centers for advanced automotive technology. So really subject matter expert people that say this is something that people will use.
So we could conceivably scrape your website for the differentiator and dump it on our website if we got our guys AvTECC certified, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's the idea.
That would be the next step.
At the end,
pushing for individual certification for the individual guys, and then the shops marketing it as hey, this is important. No one else has this. I'm just thinking that in Kansas City, I guarantee you, if I got my guy certified, it'd be the only shop in town.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking is get the team certified, and then you take and you make a video, you make post about it on your social media, you're talking about it, you go to the radio station,
so how does
about
that,
it.
like,
right?
so let's say I want to send my guys to go get AvTECC certified for EV.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So this is, when you think about what we're doing, it's not small.
Yeah,
right? You're
huge.
You're taking a massive industry and you're trying to create a new model within something that's been in existence
You're
for a long
turning
time.
a cruise ship
Yeah.
with a rowboat.
Yeah, so we've had to look at this in phases. So our first phase of this is enabling schools to become accredited assessment sites.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So that's sort of phase one of this that we're going through right now. We've been hosting webinars for schools that are interested in getting involved. That will come with it a new accreditation model that helps them kind of build curriculum around the skills delivery component of this. And eventually those will become community places where, for example, if you have technicians in your shop, you're in close proximity to a high school, college, training facility of some sort, that they can actually host appointments for people to go in and test there. We're working with, for example, we were just out at Vision. We did a teacher version of the certification the plan is at future events to bring this to
Was
industry
Sherry
events.
interested at all in like getting involved?
100%. In
Okay.
fact, Heather, who is involved with Sherry, is on our board. She's on our board of directors.
So I can spam email her and go, what the crap? When is this?
Absolutely.
Because we've got JCC. Is that where you taught it at JCCC?
Yeah, so we went to Johnson. Yep. So we went there. So I think the goal in subsequent years is going to be get to the point where we have enough of a capacity to be able to start to do this at different industry events, make it visible within our community. Well, that's why I'm doing stuff like this. But again, we need help. You know, it's we need a collective of the industry to get together and say, from a grassroots perspective, let's get
behind this, and for sure, 100%. I implore our listeners to do exactly that. Let me ask you this: so, like ASTA is coming up in September. The Sunrise Auto Conference is coming up in Phoenix in June. Tools is coming up in Pennsylvania in May. Auto Care Association and Apex in November, right? Like, are you going to be at these events, and are you going to try and like, because if you want me to make telephone calls and try and make connections or whatever we need to do, like, let's make this happen. Let's see this happen.
Yeah, we will do our best to be at what we can be at. Truth be told, we're a very small organization right now.
Yeah.
It's myself, Joe Myers, who's retired from Toyota. You guys know Justin Kidd. Justin's was actually one of our founding members.
Yeah.
And then it's a board, right? Yeah. So we're very early. We're pre-revenue.
Yeah.
You know, so we're limited into how many places we can be. So I've been kind of selective with being able to do things in a way that, you know, takes advantage of size of events and things like that, and you know, ROI from that perspective. And I've kind of had to bend, but I would love to be at everything. But you know, again, it's going to take the support of the industry to help facilitate that.
If shop owners, techs, service advisors, whoever wants to help in that, so they want to sponsor for you to go to an event, is that possible? Is that something you'd be interested in?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And if that's, you know, that's something that we've tried to work out with some of the other conferences, like even doing things like, hey, we'll come and do this. Can we have a booth?
Yeah.
You know, doing things in kind and
for sure,
taking a grassroots effort and being fiscally responsible ourselves to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But, and I think, you know, a year from now, hopefully we'll be having a much different conversation. But right now, we're going through a lot of telling people what we're doing.
Yeah.
Hopefully getting that excitement and leveraging that into support.
For sure.
And looking at different grant opportunities and other corporate sponsorship opportunities that will help us sort of in this pre-revenue phase get the word out there, because, you know, like I've alluded to before, it's a big effort.
It is. It really is.
And you have a lot of legacy players in this space that are doing similar things. So there's a lot for us to overcome.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the response that we've had from the community has been awesome.
Yeah.
Nobody has said, well, that's a really bad idea.
Right. I think we all love the idea at this point.
Yeah. So
so you become a founding member. I looked it up on the website. That's right. Is it like $250 a year?
So it's like a one-time thing, you know, or
why
however
wouldn't you make
many.
it a year?
I mean, if you want to do it every year, that's fine.
Why wouldn't you do it? Just set it up as like an ongoing.
David's going to forget. You need to set it up for reoccurring.
You got to set
recurring
it up as
revenue. We can set it up.
No,
you can
just
actually
say like $250 like founding member. It's $250 a year.
Yep.
I don't know. Other
tell
than
you
a
what.
sticker, you can throw up some perk out there.
And that's what we're trying to do, is throw some perks out there. And eventually, what will happen here is we're working on our certification management system. Once that goes live, the idea is to pilot that with our founding members, right? Have them provide feedback, because, you know, we don't have the luxury of having been around for a long time and having solved all the issues that come up when you start these programs. So that's the other thing. We're going to have bumps along the way, and we need folks to provide us with the feedback that's required to say, hey, this looks really good, or hey, this on your website looks terrible and is not a good fit. Like, so we need that critical feedback at this point too. And that's a whole idea about engaging people that are, I mean, if somebody comes in at a founding member and says, hey, here's $100 that I'd like to put towards the bottom line of the organization to help see this thing through, like, that's somebody that's vested and interested, that I'd be like, hey, you know, what are your thoughts on this? What works of this and what doesn't? Because it's funny when you're on the other side of it and you're trying to drive this new direction. I think it's really critical. I mean, here's the bottom line. I mentioned to you guys I started my career as a technician. I don't feel that in many instances we've looked at the technicians as the important player in our industry as much as we should.
Yeah.
And that's really, those are the people that we need to say, like, this makes sense to us. Like, if we do this, this means we can do X, Y, and Z. And we need employers to also go, wow, if somebody can demonstrate that they can do that, they should be making more than $16 an hour.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So it's a grassroots thing.
There. It's done.
Is that the Zephy page there?
That's the Zephy page.
Yeah. Zephy is a kind of a cool organization because they don't charge us fees.
Yeah.
So they'll ask you at the end of if you want to become a founding member, if you want to put something additional that goes to their bottom line. So it doesn't come out of the fees of the organization. But yeah, so that's where we are. And I'm sure I've blasted you way over time here.
No, I love it. And I made my donation. Did you make your donation?
I will.
No, you need to do it right now.
Well, I got to see what credit card has money.
No, you got to do it like before we get off the show.
Know what I'm saying? I got to check to see what credit card. Also, I got to see if we made more than $73 yesterday. That's all I got.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough. You know, it's when you're starting something like this, you need allies and you need people that believe in what you're doing. And, you know, just the expression of that to your listeners, the fact that, you know, you believe in what we're doing really means a ton as a new organization. And, you know, if this helps technicians, it helps young people going into the field. It helps shop owners identify who they want to hire and why they want to hire them. Then this is something I think that's really going to help our industry overall.
I agree, sir. Thank you for doing it because I know that it has been a lot of work on you. And I know, as you said, this is a labor of love. Those of us who know you well know this is not about money. This is not about stature. This is not about power. This is about being a good steward of the knowledge and ability you have. So thank you. We appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. And I appreciate that feedback because, you know, having been in this industry since I was a little bit of a kid, I love it. You know, as much as, you know, Grandpa and John Bryan tried to talk me out of it, it's something that here we are, right?
It was in the blood. It was too late.
Yeah. And, you know, there are a ton of great men and women that work in this industry that get overlooked, which is why I think, you know, the churn is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, and the goal is to really recognize their efforts too. Yeah. And that's really from a workforce development perspective, shifting the focus. And I know you guys are shop owners, but shifting it away from the shop owner and onto the technician. And that is only going to come back to the shop owner tenfold.
Amen, buddy.
You know?
100%. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, sir.